Hello there, and just welcome to this afternoon or wherever you are to this video. Thanks very much for tuning in and watching. And I just wanted to introduce my guest today, and my guest is Maryline Fevriel. I think I've got
Yeah, well done.
close. Yeah. And so we're going to be talking about some of the problems that people are experiencing in relation to loss and grief in all sorts of scenarios. And I'm working with Maryline at the moment. So I just wanted to introduce her and let her say a few words about herself and what she does.
Hello there. Thank you for having me. So I've been working with grief and loss for like a year now. So I'm a grief recovery specialist, but also I support people to actually get through their grief. So I take them through the whole process. And one of my passion is to actually make people realize what grief is and that it's actually not from bereavement. And another one is actually I love talking about death and life and accepting death as well in order to live your life. So that's my kind of work really.
Yeah.
So
Wonderful. Okay. It's such a big topic and it's certainly really important for people. So I'm really pleased to have you here today. So what is it that people, you just mentioned you wanted to talk about what is grief and what people are dealing with is not just related to bereavement. So what is the problems that, you're working with people on?
So really the thing that mostly happened is people don't understand what grief is. So they will realize that they're grieving when there is a bereavement, but don't understand that actually maybe there is a few things that has happened in their life before that that appeal to grieving, like a breakup, a divorce, moving house, moving country, for example, and also you want to do that. So, for example, in the you want to move house or you want to move country. Obviously, this is something you desire, but we don't realize the conflicting emotion that there is. So suddenly, yeah, it's great. We both, I think we've both like from different countries. So, we come here and it's great, but we do lose the communities that we had, and we have to say goodbye to our family. And although we want to be here, there is still a part of us that. So it's about, for me, it's about acknowledging what's going on and kind of like understand that there is sadness there, and it is okay to be sad. So because grief is cumulative, what happens is when there is a bereavement in general or something bigger, like maybe loss of health as well, you will break down. You might kind of find that a lot of the grief that you've actually kind of pressed down inside, you actually start to actually make it bigger. So then suddenly you're in a situation where everything is overwhelming, and you might find that you find yourself, you can't sleep, depression, anxiety, loss of joy, loss of everything around you, and that's where you start to realize that you actually might need some help to actually get there and realize what's going on.
You've just raised two really valuable points that I've just noticed that I can add in here. And I have the experience, like obviously you mentioned moving countries. I moved from Australia in 2003 to London, and I moved here with my husband at the time, and he was a person, he was actually from England. I met him in Australia at university, but he really missed all his friends and family at home. And the reason for that was part of his life, when his parents first emigrated to Australia, his father was working in the United Nations doing aid work in different countries and was posted in all sorts of different remote islands in the Pacific around the world at different times. So they found that they moved around quite a lot, which meant he didn't have a regular, consistent group of friends, and he kept having to leave people behind. And that wasn't something that I'd experienced because I grew up in the same place. So yeah, I can resonate with what you're talking about there with moving. And he struggled the whole time we were here. And he went back to Australia, and we've obviously divorced since then. But yeah, he definitely did go through that experience of missing everyone all the time that he was here in London.
Yeah, this is huge, and on the top of that, you know, it's gonna actually provoke like a kind of insecurity and kind of, you know, maybe difficulty to make friends and things like that. So it's very important to actually make it happen, you know, realizing that it's happening, you know.
Yeah.
Grief is normal. It is something that we're all going to go through. It is, if you haven't, you know, but also not minimizing anything that's happening to you. That's what's important to me. Meaning that if your pet is more important or you love it more than actually one of your sister, it doesn't mean that it's less important. It is more important. That's what was more important to you at the time. And there is no judgment, and there is no comparison to what, you know, the grief is. And sometimes, you know, with pet in general, people minimize it a lot. You know, it's not as important as a human being, and all of it is important because of the grief that's what's happened. The grief that you experience is as big as the love that you experience.
Yeah.
So grief and love goes hand in hand.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, for sure.
You know.
And definitely I can see, you know, I think about when you lose a pet as a child too, you know, that you do go through all of those different things throughout life. And it's interesting, they do seem a little bit different, or in my experience, to losing my mother, for example, and then losing, or even before that, my grandfather, who I was very close to as well. Yeah. So, you know, if somebody is experiencing loss or grief, but maybe they haven't realized it, what are some of the things that they might be noticing, or what might be happening to them that they might be experiencing?
They might feel stuck and not stuck in the place that they actually think they are, you know. Stuck in a way that they can't share, for example, what their experience is. They can be, I work on something when we work on grief, is make people realize where they actually are. So a lot of people might go, for example, to have more drinks than usual. They might start going shopping. And it's a way of releasing the pain you don't want to go to very quickly. So you go into this kind of a bit something that is going to give you satisfaction very quickly in order to actually to push the pain down and not going on to it. So it can be all kind of things. I mean, it can be even things like that are very positive. You might be spending 3 hours a day at the gym. And it's great. It's actually very positive. But what are you going there for? You know, is it for your body, or is it for you? Or are you actually avoiding to go somewhere that you need to go? You need to go there at some point, you know. And so that's very interesting, because it's very tricky how we think it's good for us. Therefore, you know, it's not something negative. So we will notice a negative one, you know, because, you know, we know it's not that good, you know, going to the fridge every 5 minutes and eating a lot of cakes. I should be doing something else. We don't really know why, but you know. And so that's very, very interesting to see where we hide our grief. For me, I mean, so one of my stories, my mom died when I was 4, and I actually remember that I stopped eating. So one of my things that when something happened to me or whatever, I cut myself off from my body. You know, I can see that clearly my body doesn't exist, and I kind of, you know, lose weight and the whole thing. So that's that I can see that's one of my my, you know, emotional release kind of things. You know, I cut off with everything.
Yeah.
You know, so this is quite important to actually see where you are with it. There's something I wanted to add, and yeah, it will come back to me about it.
Well, interesting that you say that, because I've got a similar experience to kind of add here as well. My mother died in quite a traumatic way in a bushfire in Australia on our farm. And it was only in knee-deep water, so it wasn't that she was in a place where she drowned because she was out of her depth, you know. So it must have been just sort of things like the heat of the fire and the heat of the day, because it's quite a hot place in Brisbane, and she's fainted and just fallen forward into the water. So it's interesting because I didn't realize, and I'm only looking backwards, I can see where I was denying dealing with any of that trauma and not even realizing it was a trauma actually. But it took me 15 years to get to that point. So for 15 years, I was doing things like running half marathons, you know, doing all those things like you talk about, pushing myself, driving, you know, more, trying to achieve more, trying to push harder and be maybe even given some sort of acknowledgement for being a good girl. You know, I mean, something was underlying there that, you know, I'd lost my mum. But what was even more difficult was, you know, like I said, I was running half marathons, so very fit person. And when I finally did get to the point where I connected with a counselor to go and work with, I was at the point one day in the gym where I was doing a class and I was going to see the counselor that evening, and I had we were asked to do a V sit-up, so where you're raising both of your legs and then you're raising your upper body into a shape of a V at the same time over a Swiss ball, like Swiss ball on you. And I laid there and recognized I had no will in my mind to lift any part of my body. I was really exhausted basically at that point. I'd actually probably got to the point where it was near the end sort of thing. And so, but it's interesting because like, I didn't know I was pushing myself so much to avoid it. I wasn't even aware of it, if you know what I mean. I was, you know, I was doing lots of hedonistic things as well, drinking and having a good time, like, to avoid it over the years. But it finally caught up, kind of thing. So, you know, I mean, only after that did I go into depression, and I noticed there was eating and all sorts of other bad behaviors that came in. So how can people kind of even reach out for help if they're not really aware?
Yeah, that's the big problem. You know, it's like people are not aware of what they're doing. They've pushed it away because the society is telling us that, you know, kind of get on with it. We're expected to be over the grief in 6 months. We're expected to you know, to kind of not get there. So we become very isolated, and that doesn't. When I mean by isolated, it's not by isolated physically, but isolated mentally. That you don't talk about your pain anymore. You know, you don't want to be a burden anymore. You don't want to be. So in order for you not to go there on your own, then you start to do, you know, to do everything that could distract you as much as possible. So what you know, and there will be one point where, you know, it will be, because next Christmas will be the next date, and the dates that are, it will be every year, it will succumb you, and you will not know what to do. So the first year you will kind of manage, second year manage, and you are going to manage for a while. But how long are you going to manage to? So for me, it's about making people aware of what's happening within their body, what's happening within them, because very often within the family, they don't talk about it. And also, they stopped talking about it. And also, they kind of grieve all differently. And by grieving differently is like there is competition about, I loved her more type of thing. There is that kind of things that can happen. Therefore, I'm hurting more. I was closer than to her than you were. So there is all that. Then when a parent died, which happened with my family, I was not so aware of it because I was 4, but I know very well. All my sisters were much older than me. So that's an interesting thing. We were 8 of us. I was the youngest, so oldest was 20. So she had a relationship with my mom. So her experience of grief is completely different to mine. So my story in the same family with the same instant, my story is completely different to hers.
Yeah.
And also what happened is they thought my dad, what came to them, my dad was hurt more than anybody else. So they covered up their grief. All the children covered up their grief in order to give space to my dad to grieve. And that was more than a year. That everybody panicked. Well, apparently that's what I heard, that, they were not very sure what he was going to do. So since after that, we started not to talk about my mom. So we never talked about my mom. And I'm talking here in the 60s, beginning, she died in 67. So there was no question of going to no therapists or counselors or anything like that. No, there was, but it's interesting to see because it's still happening, never mind in the 60s. It's the same thing happened now. We give space to my, like another thing that happened, my sister died when she was 45, so I was 35. And there again, because she was a sibling, we gave space to my dad for losing a child much more than anybody else. And losing a child seems to be, we go into this hierarchy of feelings, losing a child is worse than losing a thing. Losing a sibling is more than actually losing a pet. We compare all the time the different loss and the different things. And, and then a pet, it's like, there is all these things that happens as well, where the typical one, I'm going to talk very briefly about the typical myth that we're talking, that if you lose a pet, you can replace it. And it's like, what is this about? You cannot replace what you have. What you have to do is grieve for what is gone, and maybe later you actually have another one. It's the same that happened with miscarriages. Oh, but you can get pregnant again. It's not the point. The point is I've just gone through a trauma here. You go through a divorce and said, oh, you better off without him. What's we hear all kind of things that are crazy, absolutely crazy. So that's I'm very passionate about that. That's making people aware of how to also helping people to grieve. There is also an idea about talking about how to help a grieving person beside you. What to say and what not to say. So
that's fabulous, because actually you just raised a few other points here for me, thinking that it's so common. People don't want to upset the grieving person. And you're so right. The relationship to the person is always different. So it's a very individual experience, whether it be a loss of a divorce or whatever, and a bereavement. And because people don't want to upset you or don't want to see you cry because they don't know how to react, they don't want to talk to you about it, kind of thing, because they don't want to, and what has been my experience, and I don't know whether this is the same for everyone, but certainly for me, when I was in that place, I wanted the world to stop and I wanted everyone to be able to talk about my mum. That was the only thing that was on my mind. I couldn't get my head anywhere else, kind of thing. My mind was, and that was probably all throughout nearly the first year or more. And I wondered why everybody I'd go out to dinner with friends, even in the first month, and go, they ask me for 1 minute if I'm okay, and then they sit around the table talking about just anything else, and I'm like, hello, my whole world is just dead here. And it's such an interesting point too, because my mother, I had her over at my place a couple of months before she died, and we went to visit another friend of mine who his wife had been murdered by her estranged husband because he was jealous of this new relationship. And because my mum was staying with me that night, I took her round to visit it was my boss actually. And when we went round to visit him, one of the things that my mum said to him was, gosh, she must have been so scared and afraid. And I'm like, looking at my mum going, what are you saying? And you know what? My mum was 68 at that time.
Yeah.
And what my mum taught me, even retrospectively after her death, basically, which was a few months later, that you do go there with people. It is right to open up to that pain. It is right to allow the person to talk to. But we're so busy going, we don't want to talk about it. We don't know how to handle it, and we don't want to upset them because we've culturally been kind of bought into up that way that we just don't do it. And we don't allow the person even to cry in front of us. We don't help anyone around us.
Yeah, we get all the tapping at the back of the at the back, which
you'll be all right. Yeah,
at the back. Just don't do it, okay? To a grieving person, I'm just going to say that. Don't do it. What you're doing is like, you're going to be okay. Can you stop now? Can you stop crying, please? Because I can't handle it.
Yeah.
It's a way of stopping people. But I mean,
and it's because we don't want to be upset, isn't it? As well, it's like we feel, and it's probably because we feel helpless in trying to be able to help that person. And actually, there isn't something that you can do apart from be listening to the person.
Just be there.
Yeah.
Just be there.
Yeah.
Just be there and let them talk, let them cry, let them do everything. Just don't say anything. Just be in the presence, be present, and that's all that you can do.
Yeah.
There is don't try to rescue them, don't try to do anything like that. And that's what I would say, really.
Yeah, so that brings me on to the next point as well, where I was going to ask, what if, nothing happens? Like, what if these people don't get any sort of help or support, or, what's going to happen to them, kind of thing. And I just wanted to kind of pop into here, which related to something that you mentioned about your father losing his wife and you're like making kind of a concession for him. It was really interesting. In my family, it was the same. We were worried about my father as well, but we went there. We actually would continually go, are you going to be okay? What are you going to do? You're not going to, take your own life, or, we did actually, me and my brother just, had that conversation up front with him. If I'd ring and I couldn't get him, I'd be worried. Do I need to get in the car and drive around, kind of thing? So, I mean, that's kind of one possibility that people could, not handle it and take their own life, kind of thing. But what is the more general scenarios that people experience when they don't have any help?
Depression, anxiety, that's completely, being alone, isolating. They isolate themselves. They don't want to talk anymore. That's the typical one. I think it can go further than that. I'm going to take obviously I don't have any proof for that, but my sister was 14 when my mother died. One of my sister. She was very close. We were very close. And when she never to me or to any of my brothers and sisters, only to my sister not very often, talked about my mom. She never did. She never talked to her husband about my mom. She never talked to her children about my mom. She never did. Okay. She swallowed everything. So it is somebody that would never get upset, would swallow everything, would kind of never get angry. And I deeply believe that she actually kind of made herself heal.
Yeah.
She died from a cancer of pancreas. She died within 6 months. It was very quick. Like my dad, like my mom was very quick. She died at the same age that her son was when she, and there is always a repetition in dying for, you know, there is repetition all the time, and it's for you to actually become aware and break the pattern. And I am convinced that she had never grieved. I am convinced that it's somebody that completely kind of took it in, and I do believe that she made herself sick from the grieving in her case. And I do think that there is a reaction in the body that will actually can be deeper than, you know. So one of the, you know, we were talking before about the, you know, how you can know that you're not grieving if you're actually not feeling well. If your body is actually kind of not together, maybe there is something to look at.
Yeah.
You know, and that could be one of the first things, you know. So that's how far it can go, I think. If
I think some of the things that you could try to look at if it was you as a person, like individually, like if anybody who's watching this, that there are indicators, like if you're not feeling like going out with friends, and that's starting to reoccur quite a lot. You're starting to stay at home alone. Things like, you know, just not wanting to be around other people and sort of isolating yourself. Not contacting people on the phone, not wanting, you know, just all of those things just make you more unhappy. And you know, probably started from the sadness, of course, but when you withdraw from people like that, then you don't feel at a point when it gets worse that it's easy to reach out to anyone, because you've kind of almost cut yourself off. So that, you know, you will become more anxious, especially, you know, another thing that I do is I have a group called the London Self-Exploration Meetup group, on which I started really for people with depression in London. And it was really just to take people on a 30-minute walk. And this park behind me here, and the image here is Regent's Park. And I also do in Hampstead Heath, clearly not now because it's lockdown. But I used to just run a 30-minute walk a couple of days a week, just to get people out of the house. Who maybe, and you know, some of them would tell me their stories, and their stories were often that, you know, they've cut off from their family or stuff like that, so they're not contacting people, you know. That's something you definitely could look at for yourself if you're feeling really sad and not wanting to be involved in things. But then, like you said, the other side is then when you do become sort of hedonistic and you kind of use, you know, abuse of substances like alcohol or partying or those kind of things, like to avoid dealing with things. Sex even is another one where people, you know, when, you know, you can throw yourself into
all kind of absolutely
short-term
so
relationships kind of thing, and just not attaching properly to people.
Absolutely. There is all kind of things that you can look at and reattach to a loss of some, you know. It doesn't have to be a bereavement, but certainly a loss of something will actually kind of so it's very important. It's very important to actually like become aware of all the little bits that happens. I mean, I think there is something that I'd like to mention. It's about the importance of grieving. Some people don't want to go to the pain and are very scared of it. There is also the idea that if you don't feel the pain, it means that you don't love them anymore, and it means that you're going to forget about them. People are very scared of forgetting their loved one, and that's why they don't want to actually go there, and they don't want to actually recover. I mean, I can have my own definition of recovery, but don't want to actually go there, and kind of are even scared of going there.
Me.
Mm.
Exactly what I did.
Yeah,
It's
because at
interesting,
the
to
end,
say that.
yeah, it's very interesting, because at the end of the day, you will never stop loving them,
Mm,
and you will never forget them, because
no.
the memories, how you recover and how you actually heal the pain, is actually remembering the memories. The
Mm,
memories are the one that, so that's what we're doing with our loved one. What we do is we create memories, and
mm,
what we have when they're gone, we have all those memories, we have all this time that we spend together, and that's what will heal you, and that's what you kind of start to have a portal, if you want, of changing your life, because that's what you did.
mm,
And that's where, for me, the catalyst starts. It's when you're actually very, very aware that you love them that much, and you still love them that much, and you had all this time with them, with all those beautiful memories,
mm,
and that's where it's quite important. I mean, my definition of recovery, if I can say, is finding a new meaning for life without the fear of being hurt again.
mm.
So really, recovering is, finding that actually it is okay, and finding that you've got, your life is not going to be the same as before, but it's going to be a new one, and it's going to be as, fulfilling as it was with that loved one.
Yeah.
Your life is not less without that loved one. You know,
I love
it's
that definition. It actually really resonates with me. And it's funny, I can see that now. The first big loss I had was 5 years before my mum, which was my grandfather. I think I mentioned that earlier. I was quite close with him. And I, at that point, thought, why would you ever have children to put them through this pain, And then obviously 20 years after my mum died, which is this year, and actually only last week, my auntie died, which is one of my mum's sister. She was 91. And I really have a completely different relationship with death now after those 25 years have passed. So I'm interested in your recovery, because actually when I hear you speak about that, then I think I'm actually recovered, so to speak, as in because my auntie has died, I've actually felt happy that I wrote a letter to her, because obviously we're trapped in lockdown, to say goodbye to her 2 months ago when they took her into hospital originally with kidney failure, and she hadn't had it before. It just happened. And then I'd spoke to her 2 more times on the phone since then. And when my cousin rang to say his mum had died, I was like, I'm actually at peace with this, because I got to speak to her twice more, and I didn't think she would be here that long. And of course, I'm still grieving as well. I did have a cry on the weekend, kind of thing. But the fact that I've actually gone, we had so many millions of wonderful experiences with her, and I'm saying this like 2 or 3 days after she died to people. We've got millions of experiences that we had, which was so wonderful, and that's what I am so happy that we had with her. So amazing.
So that's what that's what you're healing with. That's your healing process, is to actually remember, and there is something we can call the completion of the relationship, because very often, what happened when somebody died or a loss, it's like the hope and the expectation and the dreams are gone. So it happened with every losses like that. You had some hope, you had some dreams, and they're all gone. You dreamt and you hoped that your mother would actually be there much longer and come and see you in London or whatever. So all that, it's all gone. And there is a way that you can actually, and I am completely you know, it's so good that you actually managed to write a letter to your auntie before and tell her whatever, because really often we still have things that we want to say that we didn't say.
Yeah.
And, you know, there is a lot of things. So that's something of the process of the recovery and the process that I take people through, where you can actually still do that. You have to have an honest view at what your relationship with that person was, because very often what's going to happen is you're going to, you know, put them on a pedestal.
Yeah.
And they can't have done anything wrong, but this is not an honest situation with what the relationship was. Or you might, in order to make your pain easier, you might also put them, you know, like bedevil them. You know, they were, you know, there was a worse relationship and I don't want to hear anything about them, and, you know, whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
And at the end, you're not actually dealing with it.
No.
You know, you're not. You're actually kind of just, you know, being hangry and whatever, because you don't want to be like scared, and you don't want to be hurt, and you don't want to feel all these feelings, you know. So that's quite important, to actually be quite honest with yourself of what the relationship with the person or the thing or the situation was, you know.
Yeah. And I was very close with this aunt, so I was probably one of the closest nieces to her, so, you know, like, it's just such a different experience this time for me. And so when people start working with you, or people start to make changes, what sort of changes would they be making, kind of, to start addressing, you know, their mind and their grief and what's going on? And then how would those changes be impacting them? What would they be experiencing?
What the experience is, first of all, there is a lot of relief into talking. Okay, so there is also talking therapy and things. But I take my clients through a process of action, because if you don't take action, nothing will happen. You know, you're going to be stuck with that, what happened and how it happened and whatever. And the process of recovery or feeling better is to actually understand what has happened and actually move further than that. So that's where, and the learning of what happened and the learning of how to process every wave, because it will happen. You know, you're gonna be completely fine, and one day you're gonna collapse and you're gonna cry for whatever reason. You don't know what triggered you, but you're gonna be there. And it's to understand and learn how to ride the waves, really. You know, and just let yourself go in that sadness. You know, being sad, it's a normal experience. It's just there. You know, it's not more than that. You know, you suddenly feel sad again when you thought you were completely fine about it. Yes, it is absolutely fine. So give yourself 3 hours of going through, you know, the sadness of, you know, your mother, your father not being there, or whoever, you know, and give yourself the space. So that's what I teach people. I teach people to actually understand and learn to ride the wave and go further. What I do teach them as well is to actually detach themselves and not identify with the pain. And that's really, really important, because what happened at the beginning is, like I said before, you attach yourself with the pain, you become very dependent of the pain because you don't want to let go, just in case you're not going to remember them if you let go of that pain. So you become very dependent of it, and you don't, you know, you live it. But once you actually kind of let go of the pain, what happened is you have the sadness, and it's completely fine to then, you know. So it's actually kind of detaching yourself from that pain and that, you know, really crucial feelings that there is inside that makes you completely disabled. You know, you can attach yourself too much to it. And this is, you know, about detaching yourself, understanding, and then kind of learn to ride the wave when the sadness comes. That's how I would describe it.
And it's funny, every time we speak about this, like, everything that you talk about is exactly my experience. And I even remember I used to, for years, when I'd introduce myself, it was almost like, hi, my name's Maryline and my mother died in a bushfire on our farm. I really did define myself by my mother and my loss. For so long. Obviously, went through years of depression, and I did have to ride those waves that you were talking about, and obviously had a counselor helping me through all those times. So and I couldn't have done it without that person helping me. So it's absolutely a thing that I would highly recommend for people, to be able to have somebody who can really hold them to walk through this part of their life, because it's the most challenging for all of us, especially when people are struggling to understand it themselves and how to be there for their friends. It's not always easy for everyone's friends. So you do have to reach out to a person to help.
And we live in a moment where it's been very difficult with COVID. So there was a lot of losses during COVID, the loss of freedom, the loss of the normality of our life, suddenly. So a lot of people started to grieve and isolate and depression, apart from the fact that we had to. There was, more to it, and then there's going to be like all these kind of people that hasn't been able to actually see their loved one for the last time. And that's going to be kind of something really, really we need to address. People couldn't go to the funerals and things. So that's quite a lot been going on in the last 6 months, really, with grieving.
Yeah, for sure. You're absolutely right. And so I guess in thinking about that, when people do start to work through some of these things that they're struggling with, these losses, what would it be like when the person kind of experiences? So really, I'm sort of asking, like, what's the benefit that people are going to get by, going through this to the other side? Like, I mean, we talked about riding the waves, but when people have got to the other side, what really is their life going to be more like?
Well, they're going to be able to actually own their own life and enjoy their own life without guilt and without shame that they're actually doing that. How do I dare enjoying my life when somebody's dead? Or something like that, and that's what they get. For me, it's all about, getting hold of all my life and enjoying it. And that's been a very long journey, and I'm still on it, actually, because I never thought, I mean, that's something that maybe I could talk another time, what it is to live without a mother. But it's, allowing myself, and I think a lot of people are like that, allowing yourself to be able to enjoy your life, without any guilt that it can happen.
And it might be hard for people to even acknowledge that that's going to be possible for them at the moment, but certainly there is there is a way. Possibility. For sure.
So I would just like people to actually just try to imagine that it could be a little possibilities there, and when they start with that, then then they can see.
For sure. So thank you so much. What a wonderful topic. I know we've had quite a lot to talk about, and I say wonderful in that it's a place that we need to go to with people. Like, I mean, obviously it's difficult for people, and this is why we're talking about this. But so if people wanted to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
So I am on Facebook. So for me, the easiest is like a DM me. Messenger is a great way to get me, or otherwise, I don't know if we can put my email address where, I don't know if it's that possible, but DM me, Messenger, Facebook. I'm on Instagram as well, so you can get me there as well. So that's a good way to actually come and have a chat.
Perfect. We will, when we post this video, we will put your details so they can have a link to click on underneath the video. So they can get in contact and get some guidance from you, which is fabulous. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great. Thank you, Marilyn.
Okay, thanks. Bye for now.
Bye. Bye.